Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things and welcome to another video. And today I'm going to be doing my May reading wrap up and telling you about all the books that I read in the month of May. So in May I read 17 books. 7 of them were unpublished books that I read for work. I work for a publisher, so I do have to do reading for work that I can't talk about on this channel, but that does mean I have 10 books that I can talk to you about today. So I will start off as always with the classics. This month I finished off listening to the audiobook of Our Mutual Friend by Charles Dickens. I started this back in April and I was about halfway through when the month began, and I finished this off during May and I absolutely loved it. Our Mutual Friend is my favourite novel of all time. I've read it many times before, but I've always read it in physical form before. I've never listened to it on audiobook, and this time I listened to the audiobook narrated by Vera Maine, which I really enjoyed. It was a really fantastic reading experience, and most of her voices I thought were just fantastic. So Our Mutual Friend was Dickens's last finished novel, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. It tells the story of this fortune made by this man called Harmon. At the beginning of the book, old Mr. Harmon dies and he leaves the fortune to his son, but his son is found drowned, and so the book basically follows what happens to his fortune afterwards and the mystery surrounding John Harmon's drowning. And we follow all the different people whose lives are affected by this fortune. I think it's a truly incredible book. I love the way it looks at class and money, and also the way it looks at love and relationships and friendships, and I think it has some of Dickens's absolutely best characters in it. Like Lizzie Hexam, like Bella Wilfer, like Bradley Headstone, like Jenny Wren, who is my favourite character in all of Dickens. I just think it's a truly fantastic book. I love listening to it on audiobook because it was a really nice way to experience the book in a way that I'd never experienced it before, which was lovely. I thought it was a really great audiobook, and it was just lovely to reread this again. It's been such a lovely, comforting listen in the last 2 months, so yeah. Highly recommend Our Mutual Friend, highly recommend the audiobook. It was, as always with this book, a truly fantastic read. The other Victorian novel I read in May was another reread, and that was The Odd Women by George Gissing. This I was doing a read-along of. I hosted it with Marissa from Blatantly Bookish, and many of you joined in, which was really exciting. This is a truly incredible book, which I love a lot. It is a late Victorian proto-feminist novel looking at the position of women in society. The title, The Odd Women, refers to odd, not as in eccentric or strange, but as in unpaired, not part of a pair. And it basically looks at single women in the Victorian period, what their options were, how limited the options were, and also how their options were starting to increase, and sort of how the position of women, and especially of single women, was changing in the late Victorian period. But it also examines marriage in a really interesting way and gender roles within that. And it's just a truly fantastic book that I love so much. It was a real joy to reread this, and especially to reread it along with lots of other people, which was really cool. I know a lot of people really enjoyed it, and Marissa really liked it as well, which made me very happy because this was her first time reading it. So me and Marissa have done some individual videos on this. I'll link down below our spoiler-free video on The Odd Women, and also the spoilery discussion we did. I will at some point in the next month or so try and make one of my analytical feminist Victorian videos on The Odd Women. I'm just planning that out at the moment, so hopefully that will come soon. I just love this book a lot. I think it's fantastic. I think it is one of the most feminist Victorian novels I've read, and like the portrait of feminism in it isn't perfect in every way, but I think it's incredibly fascinating, very far ahead of its time, and just a really wonderful read with a fantastic plot as well as that. Like, I feel like it could so easily have been a book of ideas, but actually for a book of ideas it also has incredible characters and incredible plot, like so many complicated things going on. I just think it's amazing. This month I also read The House of Mirth by Edith Wharton, which I buddy read with Leanne Rose, and I'll link her channel down below. So The House of Mirth is a very early 20th century American classic. I've read one Edith Wharton book before, which was Ethan Frome, which I really enjoyed as well. I can't decide which I like most yet. I only finished listening to The House of Mirth this morning, so it's still very fresh in my mind. I listened to this on audiobook, which I really enjoyed, and I thought it was a fascinating read. So The House of Mirth basically examines early 20th century American high society, and we follow a young woman called Lily Bart, who is sort of in with high society. She has many friends who are very wealthy, but she herself is not wealthy, and she spends a lot of her life worrying about how to get money and how to have enough money to, one, indulge the kind of luxurious lifestyle that she wants to lead, but also in order to fit in with the people who are her friends, even though she does not have nearly as much money as they do. She is in her late 20s, and she is starting to feel feel the pressure to get married and starting to feel like the only way she can have any independence in life from her relations and her friends is for her to get married and have an establishment of her own. But that presents all kind of difficulties, and she's quite a free, independent spirit who doesn't necessarily want to get married and doesn't want to change herself to fit into the molds that various men around her want her to be in. The book is fascinating. It really examines gender roles in early 20th century America, but it also looks fascinatingly at class and wealth and kind of various interesting moral issues, I suppose. Lily's a very interesting character because I don't think she is necessarily the most likeable character in the book, and often she does things that you disapprove of, and you can see a lot of the time that her motivation for things is a desire for luxury, but at the same time she's an incredibly sympathetic and interesting character. She's very, very complicated, and you do really grow to understand her and all the people around her as well. And beyond Lily, all the rest of the minor characters are really fascinating as well, and the sort of exploration of society through these different people and their different roles in it was really, really fascinating, I thought. So yeah, I really enjoyed The House of Mirth. I thought it was fascinating. It was really nice to read some more by Edith Wharton as well, and it was nice to read an American classic because I haven't read as many of them as I would like. So yeah, I really, really loved The House of Mirth, and I would definitely recommend it. Another classic I listened to this month was Carrion Gees by P.G. Wodehouse. This is the third book in the Jeeves and Wooster series by P.G. Wodehouse, which me and my fiance Nick have been working through together on audiobook. I am really enjoying the Jeeves series so far, and this was really great fun. I will say there are a couple of short stories in here which were repeats of older stories from the first Jeeves, which I've read before, which was a bit of a shame, but the new stories in there I really, really enjoyed. I just find Bertie Wooster and Jeeves a wonderful, glorious combination. So if you don't know the basic premise of the Jeeves novels and short stories, Bertie Wooster is a very upper class man living in 1920s and 30s London society. He is charming and fun and very entertaining, but he is not very intelligent. However, his valet, Jeeves, is incredibly intelligent, so Bertie Wooster goes to his valet Jeeves with all of his problems and all of his friends' problems, and Jeeves saves the day, and it's very, very entertaining and very, very silly and really, really good fun. I also love the ridiculous 1920s slang. It's so bizarre and it's very, very entertaining. Highly recommend the Jeeves books if you haven't ever read them, and I would say that listening to them on audiobook is really, really nice. The audiobooks narrated by Jonathan Cecil are really, really great and very, very entertaining and fun, and I definitely feel like the tone of voice makes some of Bertie Wooster's weird slang much more approachable as well. Another classic I read this month was this. This is The Woman Novelist and Other Stories by Diana Gardner. This is a Persephone classic. So these short stories were all published in the 1930s and 1940s, and Diana Gardner is a wonderful writer. I really, really loved these. They're absolutely fascinating stories looking at various issues, often focusing on women in the 30s and 40s, and quite a lot of the book looks at either the Second World War, sort of just before and after and during, the effects of it and sort of the lead up to it. But also there are several stories that are set in the 30s before the Second World War that look at relationships between Britain and Germany and between British and German people in a really interesting way. And there are just some wonderful stories in here. I think the way some of these stories look at marriage and the position of women in the 30s and 40s at this point in the 20th century is just fascinating. And I loved her very, very clear and fluid writing style. I thought it was fantastic. So this is definitely one of my favourite reads of the month. It was so readable and so engaging and so thought-provoking and smart, and I haven't read short stories I've loved this much for ages, so I'm definitely going to be looking up more by Diana Gardner in the future. I think she had a novel out in the 1950s, so I'm definitely looking forward to hopefully reading that in the future. This was a really fantastic read. Moving from the classics into contemporary fiction, this month I finally got around to reading the Gustav Sonata by Rose Tremaine. I've been meaning to read this for ages, and I thought I would really love it, and I did not really love it. So this book is interesting. Everything I'd heard about this book had made me think that I was really, really going to love it. And what I had heard about this book was that it was about the relationship between two boys growing up in Switzerland just after the Second World War. But actually, the first third of the book is about two young boys growing up in Switzerland after the Second World War from very different backgrounds and how they relate to each other. But then the middle third of the book is about one of those boys' parents. And then the last third of the book is about those boys, but when they're much older. And I didn't feel like it hung together. And I loved the first third, and after that, I didn't like it very much. And I think that's partly because I had in my head what this book was going to be, and it wasn't the coming of age story I thought it would be. And also because I felt like the middle section of the book didn't really need to be there, and that the last section of the book wasn't very satisfying because we saw such a big jump in Gustav's life and we didn't see anything in the middle. I feel like the beginning of this book had the potential to be something wonderful that I would really, really love, and then that last chapter or two I thought was really strong, but everything in the middle just wasn't quite right for me. It wasn't quite there. So I'm glad I finally got around to reading it, because this has been on my shelves for ages, but I just didn't quite love it. And I think I was expecting to, which made me even sadder that I didn't love it, if you see my meaning. Just wasn't quite for me. It felt like one of those books which I especially find sometimes in literary fiction where it lacks focus, and I don't necessarily need like a super dramatic plot, but I need a focus to the book of what it's about. And I think the focus of this book is supposed to be the relationship between Gustav and Anton, but actually that's not really what's in the book. And that's sort of missing from the middle section of the book. So I'm glad I finally read it, but this one wasn't really for me. Another book that's been on my shelves for a while that I finally got around to reading this month was Ruin's Wake by Patrick Edwards. This is a fantastic science fiction novel that I really, really enjoyed. I haven't read any sci-fi for ages and I just loved it. It's really, really engaging. It is set in a dystopian future where a very large sort of totalitarian state has taken over much of the world, and we follow three characters in very different situations. One is a man who is kind of travelling across the world after learning that his son is dying. The other is a woman trapped in an abusive marriage, and the other is a scientist, and she is kind of trying to uncover what she thinks might be technology left over from the old world that has been completely forgotten. This is just an incredibly engaging read with a really, really compelling plotline and fantastic characters, but it was also really thought-provoking as well, and I think the kind of political and technological themes in here were really, really fascinating. So I would highly, highly recommend Ruin's Wake. It's a really, really wonderful book. It was especially exciting for me to read this because I actually did my creative writing masters with the author, and I read some of this book in very, very early stages, a very long time ago, and so it was quite interesting to read some of the scenes at the beginning and be like, oh yes, I read this in a different form a long time ago. That was quite fun as well. So yeah, definitely a fantastic read and one I would highly recommend. This month I also read The House of Impossible Beauties by Joseph Katsura. This was a fantastic novel. It was truly brilliantly written and really, really wonderful, and I liked it much more than I was expecting to, actually. I think because this is one of those books that has been on my shelves for a while, but I didn't actually know that much about it. I wasn't necessarily expecting to love it, and I think I really did. But which I mean, I think this is a fantastic book, but it's also very, very hard-hitting. I don't feel like it would be right to say I enjoyed this book, though I loved the writing and though I think it's incredibly powerful and really, really fantastic. So, The House of Impossible Beauties follows various different characters, particularly four characters, all of whom are connected by the sort of transgender and gay scene in New York in the 1980s. And we follow two transgender women and two gay men and their kind of friendships and bonds with each other, as well as the way the outside world treats them. And this book, being set over the 80s and 90s, also looks at the AIDS crisis as well. Like I said, this is a really, really fantastic read. I think the writing style and the narrative voices in it are fantastic. Like, I just love the way this is written. And I think it's been a little while since I read anything that was written, not exactly experimentally, but that was written unusually, in a way that I just thought was fantastic, and I felt really like warranted its place, and the writing really brought the story to life and really brought the characters to life, which I thought was wonderful. I think the characterization in this is fantastic, and the plotting as well, and the shifting between different characters and the exploration of their relationships was wonderful. Like I said, it was incredibly hard-hitting. Like, I finished this book and like cried for ages. So it's definitely not an easy read, but it is truly brilliantly written, and I would highly, highly recommend it. I think it's a fantastic novel. Don't go into it expecting anything terribly cheerful, but I would really, really recommend it because it is just a brilliant, brilliant read. Something slightly more cheerful, this month I also read If You Could Go Anywhere by Paige Toon. This novel follows a young woman called Angie. She's in her mid to late 20s. She's living in a very small town in the desert in Australia where she has lived all of her life. She has been her grandmother's carer for a long time. Her grandmother's had dementia, and at the beginning of the book her grandmother passes away and Angie suddenly realises that she can go anywhere and do anything with her life. But then she discovers in her grandmother's things a letter from her her mother, who passed away a long time ago, to her father, who she had never known about and didn't know existed. And so she goes on this trip to find and meet her long lost father. There are many things that I enjoyed about this. I thought it was a really fun, enjoyable read. It was a really quick read as well, which was always really nice. And I read this after having finished The House of Impossible Beauty, which was very, very hard-hitting and emotional, so it was nice to read something quite a bit lighter. I think the characterization in this in general was quite good fun, and this book is set across Italy and Australia, which I really, really enjoyed. I will say though that the main focus of this book is the love story in it. And I was really hoping that the main focus would be the relationship between Angie and her long-lost dad. And there's a little bit of that, but there's not very much of that. And I thought that was a real shame, because I thought that could have been really interesting, and I didn't especially like the love story that much. So I found this a really enjoyable read, but I didn't find the ending necessarily that satisfying. And definitely there was like one element of the plot that I felt a lot more could have been done with. So I did enjoy it, but it wasn't really one of my favourites in this genre. But I did really enjoy the writing, so I might pick up something else by page 2 in the future. Finally, I also read Witch Week by Diana Wynne Jones. This is a middle grade novel, I suppose, though it's from the 80s, so a bit pre the term middle grade. But this is a children's book, and one that I really enjoyed. This is one of the Chrestomanci series, the third book in the Chrestomanci series. I've read the previous two and really enjoyed them, and these books are all sort of loosely linked by the character of Chrestomanci, but they're set in sort of different parallel worlds. So Witch Week is set in a parallel world where magic is banned and magic is not allowed, and anyone who is a witch is burned at the stake. And we follow 1 week in this school where a couple of the school children start developing magical abilities, and they're like at great pains to hide it from everybody else. It's really, really good fun. It's very, very entertaining, very funny. I really, really like Diana Wynne Jones' writing style. I think she's very, very witty and entertaining, and her characterization is great. There are so many great characters in this book, and the twists and turns of the plot are really good fun as well. So this was a great read. I'd highly recommend it, and I'm looking forward to reading more by Diana Wynne Jones in the future. So there we have it. Those are all the books that I read in the month of May. Please do let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. And also let me know what your favourite thing that you read in May was. And that is all for now. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.